Now it's taken ages. Right, here we go, ladies. It's Wednesday night. We're all excited for the. Right, just give me 1 second. There we go. There we go. Wonderful. So, thank you guys. Welcome to everybody to today's Warrior Women discussion. I'm Dionne Simpson, author and advocate against domestic abuse. We've got the wonderful Yvette Dooley with us today, and the wonderful Maz Alexander. So, do you just want to give like a very brief, like, hey, who are you? Go on, Maz.
Oops, sorry, couldn't unmute. Sorry, I thought we were doing an order. But yes, hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Maz Alexander. Like Dion, wear many hats, but I am a mental health and wellbeing coach, adult social worker, author, speaker, and the toughest job of all, a mother to a young adult daughter. So there we go. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yvette.
So, hi, I'm Yvette. I am a trainer for domestic abuse in Christian relationships
Mhm,
and a mental health and wellbeing trainer as well. That's again for Christian organisations,
mhm.
but also for workplaces and for schools as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. So, yeah, this evening's discussion is a bit of a sensitive one. So we're talking about sexism and misogyny really in churches and faith settings and how that can impact victims of abuse who are in churches and different places of worship trying to get support. So just to let everybody know, there will be some discussions and some comments that will talk about abuse today. Obviously, we'll keep it very, very PG, but just, a bit of a trigger warning to anybody who may have gone through something themselves or, they have a friend or family member. Don't feel that you have to sit and digest everything all at once. This session is recorded. So it's going to be up on the on YouTube, available after this point. So you can, if you need to jump out, you are more than welcome to do that and come back at a later time or watch it in little pieces as you can manage. But we do want you to engage. On the YouTube comments are open and active. So if you have questions that you'd like to put to the panel, we will, do our best to respond to those as much as we can. So if not, just, let us know that you're here, where you're from. That would be really, really great. If you have a question that you'd like to ask privately, so, perhaps you don't want your profile linked under the comments, you can send an email to author@dionsimpson.co.uk. So that'll come through to me and we can, share your question anonymously with the panel here today. So yeah, I just wanted to share very briefly why this topic came up. So I'm sure many of you will be aware of the recent television show called Adolescence, that was kind of written and produced by Stephen Graham. Stephen Graham, is that his name? I think it's Stephen Graham, isn't he? Yeah. That great Scouse guy is a brilliant, absolutely brilliant actor. And mixed race, so part of our community as well. And yeah, they touched on some really, really emerging but important topics, and it was around the misogyny, and particularly with young, adolescent boys, attitudes towards women and girls. So I won't go into the story of adolescence because I'm sure most people already know it, but that did get me thinking about, how some of these societal attitudes towards women and girls, like what does that look like in church? Like, is it in churches? Is it in, places of worship? What does that look like? And of course, you'd have to be blind to say that those sorts of attitudes don't exist in places of worship. So, we know they do, but really I wanted to really kind of pick apart how that impacts victims of abuse, whether the abuse has occurred, within faith setting or, outside of the faith setting. Churches and places of worship are, people go there for healing, people go there for support, people go there to feel safe. And as I'm sure we will delve into over this discussion, unfortunately, that's not what everybody receives. So, really, what we want to do tonight is just highlight some of those issues, and we're all going to be sharing from our personal experiences. So it's not as we have the book smarts and the knowledge and what the statistics say, but we also have this is what happened to me, this is what happened to us, and we know we're not alone in some of our experiences. So we really want to be able to reflect on the lived experiences that we've had, and look at ways that things could have been better, things could have improved, how things but there's probably been a lot of changes that have occurred since the experiences that we had, but there's always more to be done. Unfortunately, violence against women and girls is escalating. I don't have the answers. It'd be wonderful if somebody had the answers. But what we can do is continue to work to make sure that churches and places of worship are safe places of sanctuary for victims. So that's kind of the purpose of tonight. So I think, should we just jump straight in? Actually, what I'll do is I will, excuse me, as we go through each of the questions this evening, I'm going to put them in the YouTube chat as well, and then people who are on board and watching, if it'll let me get in there. Oh, here we go. Right, there we go. I've put first question is in the chat. Well done. So, how does sexism show up in our places of worship? And how does that affect women seeking help? So I think let's do it in two halves. Let's do the first bit first, eh? So, how does sexism show up in churches and places of worship? Jump in, whoever would like to jump in. Don't jump all at once.
Yeah, no, I'm coming. It takes a while to. I better stay on mute. But no, there's so many thoughts. But it shows up in many different ways. I know for me, initially being a single and divorced mother, it showed up there because there is still a stigma even today with that, and there is the assumption that you almost feel excluded, and perhaps it's not intentional, but women are often relegated to roles of caregiver roles, or you can do the Sunday school and you can do the cooking, but you can't speak, you can't have any sort of leadership role. And I'm not necessarily talking about preaching, because that's a whole separate argument, but you can't even do a 5-minute testimony, or you just need to be quiet and be at the back, sort of thing. And I've seen that because there's a hierarchy that exists, and and it's linked to the concept of submissiveness. So this can inadvertently create a breeding ground, especially for domestic violence victims and other victims of abuse. It just causes them to retreat, and they aren't able to show up as they would want to. So those are just a few. There's many more, but
yeah. Yvette?
Yeah, I was just going to, it's pretty much the same thing really, but I think what is great is that it's there are a lot more churches nowadays who are aware of these kind of things and the impact that it can have on women and on men as well, on children and young people, and how we're raising the next generation, which is absolutely brilliant. But for many, sometimes it's an undercurrent, but sometimes it's not an undercurrent, it's just out there. And I think it can make it really difficult for not just for women who are experiencing domestic violence, but also for women or men who want to create change around domestic abuse within Christian organisations. It's almost, no, it's not almost, quite often it can be dismissed as well, because when people have spoken about domestic abuse that they might be experiencing, um, sometimes they're told that, this is your role as a woman, you're there to submit, but you're there to support the man. You're there to take everything that's thrown at you, but you're there to support the man. And if he's going off key, you're there to pray and bring him into line with your prayer. If he's not in line with your prayer, then maybe you're not praying enough, or maybe you're not being a good enough wife. And for younger females and males who are not actually in relationships yet, while they're hearing this kind of talk, they can move into relationships that have the same kind of dynamics.
Yeah.
Those kind of dynamics are breeding grounds for domestic abuse, and domestic violence. And I think, well, we'll move on to that later on as well. But also when it comes to sexism, it's, we've talked before about how important it is to lean into education around healthy relationships and scripture, and combating any forms of abuse with law and scripture, with scripture and law, and how the two align with one another. But it's about, if we've got a congregation, or if we've got a space, if we've got a community that rests within sexism, then they're not going to be willing to receive the education.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing to receive the education, then those kind of issues still remain, and remain a breeding ground, a space that is ready for domestic abuse.
I mean, I'm just, thinking back to some of the ways that I've seen it show up. You're quite right, Maz, talking about, people still trying to, shame you for being a single mom. And I'm very much, in fact, it wasn't even the single mom thing. I remember being in church, and this older, and I'd mentioned the fact that I was divorced. And this very much older white gentleman came up to me and says, "Oh, well, can you not talk about that here? Like, it's not appropriate." And I was like, I didn't know this guy from anywhere. I was like, I'm sorry, what is my, okay. And it's wild. I've had another experience in church when my husband had left me, walked out and left me with, two little kids. And I'd moved to a new church because the old church they were wiling out. So I left, went to another church where I could just have some peace. And at the end of the service, a guy who I hardly know, basically decided to lecture me for 45 minutes about what I should be doing as a wife, and how it wasn't right that I'd, thrown my husband out, and that I needed to let him come home, and about my responsibilities and blah. 45 minutes standing there like a child, being, chastised by this man who, I was so embarrassed. For the church, everyone was milling around with cups and teas and coffee. Nobody came to, like, this is not appropriate. Nobody came to my defense. It was absolutely mortifying. And it didn't matter how many times I said to this guy, I didn't throw my husband out. He has got keys to the house. He can come back whenever he likes. He went to work and never came home. The old, like, well, I'm just going for milk, honey. And that's literally what happened. And somehow that was still my fault.
Yeah.
He wasn't there getting grief off people. He wasn't there dealing with the two kids and and so there was definitely a lot of victim blaming, when there was no possible way for, so that's definitely an issue that I've come across. And even just, who gives you the right to talk to people like that? And of course, sexism gave him the right.
Yeah.
So there's this whole kind of misogynistic view that because he's a man, and a man in church, and men are always the leaders and men are always right, that he had the authority to come and fix me up as a wife, so that my it's just it was devastating in so many ways.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, but but I know I'm not the only one.
No.
No, I'm not the only one. So yeah, it does definitely show up in stuff like that. Um, yeah, what was the second half of the question? So how do things like this occurring, how does that affect women? And I know we're focusing mostly on women today, on women seeking help for whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's kind of spiritual abuse or coercion, any of those things. Um, what is the outcome for those behaviours?
It's really difficult. I remember phoning the prayer line. I remember
Did
phoning
they
the
pray for
prayer
you?
line. And when I spoke about the things that I was experiencing, they were horrified, to be honest. They were like, oh gosh, that's dreadful. I'm so sorry, this shouldn't be happening. Let's pray.
Yeah,
So they prayed,
yeah,
um, which was lovely, very kind. Um, but then the phone was down and I was still left in the same situation, distressed, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. And it's interesting that I'd got to the point where I felt that I needed to call the prayer line because I tried to speak elsewhere and it just wasn't getting through.
yeah,
And it wasn't getting through in some places because as the woman, there's so much burden in Christian communities anyway. There's such a burden on women to lead but not lead, to push but not push, to encourage but be self-encouraged and be prepared to not receive encouragement themselves.
Mm.
And when I say lead but not lead, I mean simple things like if the man was doing something wrong, like committing acts of abuse and things like that. And so for many, unfortunately, not all, but in many situations, when women have reported it or asked for help within Christian communities, they have been told, well, actually, it's probably because you need to pray more. And if you pray more, God is going to hear you. Do you know what? Don't let the devil attack your marriage. That's another thing as well. There's always so much credence that's
yeah,
to the adversary. And it's also that phrase, don't let the devil win. And
Mm.
the
yeah,
onus is on the woman praying more rather than those changes being corrected. So like I say, I obviously went to the prayer line because I wasn't receiving the help where when I'd spoken about it elsewhere. But even from the prayer line, I didn't receive it from there because I think they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to refer me to. They didn't know where to signpost me to. It was really, really confusing. And again, I know I keep banging on about education, but I think it's because there's such a lack of understanding about what is abuse, and what is not, even what is abuse and what is sexism. Do you know what I mean? There's such a lack of understanding around that, and also so much misuse of scripture, when it
Mm.
comes to bringing women into submitting to abuse
yeah,
rather than submitting in a healthy relationship, if that makes sense. So when it
it,
comes to seeking help, it's about if Christian communities are educated around what domestic abuse is, then it would be a healthy space for women to seek help from. But if
Mm.
they're not educated, or if they refuse to be educated around what domestic abuse actually is, then that's not the avenue for them to seek help. Um, the time when I was able to get the help that I needed was when I engaged with a domestic abuse charity, and they were able to clearly outline what was abuse and what wasn't. And it was still all aligned with scripture,
Yeah.
But sometimes it's about speaking factually. And again,
Yeah.
it's all of that.
You touched on something really key there, Yvette, and that is around the burdens placed on women. That in and of itself is, another way that misogyny and sexism is played out. I had a really interesting conversation doing some church training around domestic abuse last year, and trying to explain to some of these leaders. I said, there are so many rules that you impose on our girls, our young women, and women in general. Being told that I'm sorry that my sleeves and that my sleeves need to be longer because I need to be covered up, or I've got skin showing on some part of my body, which is that it's inappropriate now. We went to church, but you weren't allowed to wear earrings, couldn't have makeup on, women couldn't wear trousers, you had to have your head covered. And we know all these rules still exist in many, many of the other, religions that are practiced. And relationally, you're quite right. When something's going wrong in the marriage, well, maybe you need to reflect on what it is you're doing to make him this way. You need to reflect if he's getting angry with you, well, then, there's something that you are probably doing to cause that,
Which is abuse in itself.
As if you're now responsible for another human being's behavior and actions. And we see this again and again. And I hate saying it, Adam was the first one to blame his wife, but to blame his partner. The first one. And we see that repeated and repeated, where, women are held responsible for behaviors that they have no control over, and men are not held accountable for their own behavior. Even the whole notion of, oh, women, you need to be modest, you need to cover up so you don't cause men to sin. And I was like, how about the men just, don't sin or don't objectify women that way? Or if you think that something's too, take off your jacket and say, here, let me cover you because I love you, because I respect you, not then degrade her and call her names and you must be this and you must be that because I don't approve of the thing that you're. No, it's wild, and those burdens all play out whenever you try and seek help. I had my ex-husband, and you didn't know there's something going on, and he would not talk about it at all. Kept coming home from work drunk. Like, who does that? Comes home from work drunk, was doing, urinating around inside the house, up the wall. It just, when I say the behaviour was outlandish, and I was like, something is very, very wrong. But of course, you call your leaders, don't you? Call your pastors. So tell me why they came to my house to tell me about my attitude. I was like, I'm not the one who's drunk and, peeing around the inside of my house and not in the toilet. We had an incident where he was walking around drunk, naked, and my friend and her kids were in the house. Oh, well, this is about your attitude. You can't. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. Have I been dropped in an alternate universe? And it's like there's the absolute refusal to hold men accountable. And it's like, well, whatever's happening this has to be your fault, so you need to fix it.
Yeah.
I don't know have you had that experience, Maz?
I've had many experiences that caused me to be disillusioned. But I think in what you're both saying, it's so true. There is, it goes back to the idea of, the man being the head. And I don't object to that. The man being the head of the home, and you should listen to him. And you, Dionne, are expected to make things right with him. So if there's something wrong, it's clearly you. You've done something to him. And so that kind of attitude encourages us to stay in dangerous situations. If you continue to be gaslit, effectively, that's what you were talking about before, then you're less likely to want to open up. And I just want to, the classics, because abuse is quite insidious, and it doesn't it's not just about DV, any other type of abuse. Wives, submit to your husbands. They'll quote part of that scripture, or honor your mother and father. Often myself, I've been told that, and other,
Mhm.
and if you've been something like narcissistic abuse is quite insidious. So people, Yvette touched on it before, there's this spiritual bypassing that goes on, whereby, yeah, we'll just pray it away, and there's a denial. So I know that there are people, Dionne, that are watching this, and they'll be like, what's their problem? This, not in my church, not in my church. And that's great if it doesn't happen in your church, but you're the minority. This is we're speaking generally here, because clearly it's an issue, and we're in 2025 and we're still having a conversation because it goes on. And the idea, by the way, because this is how easy it is, there's a notion of family, you know, in certain workplaces we're family, and that always used to make me feel quite uneasy, because what's family? Because that type of abuse that is left to prevail in those environments can almost kind of mirror the kind of toxic or dysfunctional families where abuse prevails. So that you know, where they call them the pastor papa, mama, and all of that, and those titles are used to kind of bring people into the submission. So just a couple of other things, you know, the fact is, if you speak up, as we all have experienced, you're ostracized, you're gaslit. Are you sure? I've been told, are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood. You know that's your family member, or that's your pastor. They just love you. They're just looking out for you. Clear lack of understanding about what abuse is. Clearly, and when there's criminal activity, what are you saying? I imagined it. And I have been subject, so whenever I've spoken up about these things, I'm next week's sermon. They're talking about what you've disclosed in confidence. Now they're using it to shame you and make an example of you, and then you get ostracized, and then you're left feeling confused. It adds to the turmoil that you're already feeling. And I know I've had a few depressive episodes anyway, but for others that can be, especially when we talk about whether it's other forms of sexual abuse, financial abuse, whatever that might look like, can cause anxiety, depression, PTSD. But even on a more general level, the social isolation that you feel, and for some people lose their faith because they feel rejected by God. They feel, just knocks your confidence, basically. Then you have the physical symptoms. So and physiological symptoms. You may experience insomnia. I know I did for a while. Things like that. And almost the most damaging sort of limiting belief that tends to, I don't have this anymore, but the belief that you must endure it like a good soldier, endure the abuse because it makes your faith stronger. That's sort of what that was touching on before. So that idea that you need to pray more. There's something wrong with you and your faith, because this even if this did happen to you, it's clearly your fault and you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, and that leads very nicely on to the next question, which I've put in the chat for us. So, what barriers do sexist attitudes create for victims when trying to access help outside of faith spaces? And you've just talked about, you know, the knock-on effect that this has on your mental well-being, on your mental stability, on your self-worth and your value. All of these things impact it. I think for me, some of the worst things have occurred because of Christians trying to help. And I don't mean, for all my lovely brothers and sisters out there, this is not, me just out here tearing you down. But it is, just something that needs to be acknowledged. This fascination with reconciliation. Now, this is not to say that, we shouldn't seek reconciliation and, forgive those who have harmed us and all of those things. Yes, they are true. What is also true is, me disclosing to a pastor that, the person who sexually abused me is a leader at their church. And their response is, oh, well, let's all get together and talk about it so that, that you can forgive them and move on. I was like, so what I'm not going to do is and it'll just be me one by myself in a room with the person who, and there's long-term abuse bearing in mind, so there's a lot of complex emotions tied up in that. And you're I said my whole reason for contacting them wasn't even about myself, really. I was just like, this person is in a position of trust. You need to know their history and what they're capable of so that you can protect the people in your church space. But no, that turned into, I need to come to the office and meet up with everybody and forgive them. I was just like, one, that forgiveness part I already did because the person's still living and breathing, yeah. So and that's that's between me and Christ. And I know, having grown up in an abusive household, having had abuse in church settings, that is something that takes time. God just doesn't come in and start, it takes time. Healing takes time. So this whole notion that you're going to have a meeting today and it's be done and finished with is an absolute crock. It's nothing but pushing issues under the carpet. And if I can convince you that that you need, in order for this situation to be resolved, you have to forgive somebody, then that's okay. And completely ignoring, as Maz said, people breaking the law, completely ignoring ongoing safeguarding concerns, like I couldn't get anybody to listen and say, this is how, and this person was operating with somebody else, bearing in mind. So they had one person who was kind of creating opportunities to identify vulnerable people in order to take advantage of them. Now, people can't get their heads around the fact that people will do that on purpose. And, that malevolence is a thing that happens within our church and faith spaces. There are people out there who will actively seek out people who are vulnerable. And when I say people who are vulnerable, I don't just mean, people with learning disabilities. I'm talking about, people who've gone through a bad breakup, because actually you then look, you've got a broken heart, and you then, you can open yourself up to new people who are paying you attention because you're so brokenhearted. People who have, recently lost a loved one and are grieving, same thing. People who are lonely can be easily targeted. New Christians can be easily targeted. The older man or older woman who have been waiting faithfully for their husband or wife, and they get swept off their feet by such and such a body. All of these things in life can make us vulnerable at different points. And there is a complete ignorance in churches and faith spaces around making sure, that people are treated as vulnerable. And that's not to say that we, pity them and all those sorts of things, but it is to say, let's keep an eye out for one another. Let's support one another. Let's not just assume that because they're an adult that they are aware of everything that's going on. It doesn't mean that then, oh well, they must have consented. And this is really the perspective of police and law enforcement when you try and speak to them about coercive control, when it's been, the abuse has been perpetrated by an adult to another adult. Nobody takes into consideration these other things that make you vulnerable. And some of those things that make you vulnerable are beliefs in church, the things that they teach us, that women are less, that we've got all these burdens and things that we have to carry that for some reason men don't, but men want all the positions at the top and all the leading, and it's so hard to I found it a really difficult thing to express, to be honest with you. Even this evening it's like, oh, how do I say this without offending everybody? And sometimes there isn't a nice way to say it. There isn't a nice way to say it other than like, we want things to be different.
I think that's why.
But that it's important to acknowledge.
Oh, sorry, we've lost you, Maz.
Sorry, go on, Yvette. Can you not hear me? Go on, Yvette.
Yeah, if you don't got it, Yvette, I think
Oh, thanks.
Maz's internet's playing up.
Okay. I hope it's not mine. It could be mine.
No,
Can
I
you
think
hear me
it's.
okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, awesome. Kind of lost my trail a little bit then. But again, yeah, it comes down to the onus being on, the woman. And I think when we talk about leadership of men within faith-based settings, it's important to really delve into what leadership is, because quite often when we talk about the role of leadership for a man or for a husband in the house, quite often what's talked about is what he's supposed to receive, which, he's supposed to receive respect, supposed to be loved, supposed to be encouraged so that he can fulfill his destiny, and so on in life. When in fact, if we are to look at scripture, and we look at the role of leadership for a male in the house, it's based around responsibility, and the heaviest responsibility, which is all centered around sacrifice. If we look at, so even the term Christian is supposed to mean being Christ-like, being more like Christ. So when we think about leadership being part of the Christian community, we're looking at Christ as our example of leadership. And when we look at Christ and we look at his example of leadership, and what he was teaching us as well, it's all about servitude. He wasn't actually walking around saying, look, I'm a leader, you've got to respect me while I'm doing this. You've got to do this for me. And anytime he was saying anything like that, basically believe in me, it was so that we could access the promise of eternal life. Do you know what I mean? He was always coming back with a reason or with something behind it. And I think, quite often, obviously, we hear lots of things around, a woman's supposed to submit to the husband. Don't want to go off track. But even in that scripture alone, if we have a look at the basis of that scripture, it's obviously, we know it's not just about the woman submitting to the husband, it's the husband actually loving the wife as Christ loved the church. And we know that Christ died for the church. He literally gave everything for the church. And again, if we're looking at the leadership role of the man, that's what the Bible calls for. But even down to the teachings of Jesus, themselves, when Jesus was on this earth and he was delivering those, he made it very clear. He made very clear distinctives between when he was given an example and when he was teaching, when he was giving us something that he wanted us to take away. And one of his last lessons, before he was taken to be unalived, was when he bent down to wash Peter's feet, wash the disciples' feet. And he took off all of his teaching roles and he bent down. He got down lower than Peter and went to wash Peter's feet. And Peter was like, you know what? No, I'm not having that. You're Jesus. You're not meant to do this. Rah, rah, all that kind of stuff. But Jesus was so adamant about it. He was saying that, look, if you don't allow me to do this for you, then you have no part of me. You will not be able to access everlasting life. You won't have that relationship with me. It's important for you to allow me to serve you. It's important for me and for you to allow me to get down below your head height to serve you, to nurture you, to take care of you, because that's how I'm going to lead you. And then Jesus went on to say, now go and do unto others as I have done unto you. And I think this is where sometimes we get it a bit mixed up when we're looking at scripture. Jesus was very, very, very clear about the fact that that was a teaching message. It was something he wanted us to grasp, and it was something that he wanted us to take outside when we're moving around and moving in his character.
Yeah.
So if we have males, husbands within the kingdom who are moving in Christ's character and in his teachings of leadership, then what we should be teaching is that level of servitude. What we should be seeing is that level of servitude. And I think what I find really, really interesting as well is that I have friends who are not Christians, who haven't given their life to the Lord, but it's really interesting because they demonstrate what Christ teaches, and the ripple effect that comes afterwards is just so beautiful, actually. So I've got a mate, I won't mention his name, but I'll tell him about it. He he's a husband, he's got a beautiful wife, they've got beautiful children as well. But when he was at work and his wife was at home, he was very much, you know what, this is an escape for me. I don't know why my wife's doing it. She's working so hard. And he would love to run home, to be with his wife, to support his wife and serve her. He would often be wanting to cook, sorry. But then as a result, she would be wanting to cook. So they would be wanting to serve each other. See, they were naturally submitting to one another. And as a result of him demonstrating that, her demonstrating that, the children then wanted to be able to cook. They wanted to be able to set the table. They wanted to be able to look after each other. You see, so it just flows.
But that's what's being modelled for them.
Because that's what's being modelled.
Yeah.
So when we come into Christian spaces where we're not acknowledging that, that's when we have to question, is it that we don't know, or is it deliberate avoidance?
And it could be either, to be honest with you. I mean, I do have to say this, and it was something that I thought. So I've been very fortunate to be a student with Birmingham Bible College, so doing Christian leadership and ministry, and we had a really, really great conversation around leadership, and we were talking about what is leadership, what leadership is, what leadership isn't. And then, particularly me anyway, I always raise the the difficult questions, the difficult topics. And I said, there's so many Christian men who believe that leading means having the suit, being in charge, being at the front of church, preaching. I said, you couldn't be more wrong. I said, Jesus was not messing with the Pharisees in the temple. I said he was out with the tax collectors, hanging out with the prostitutes and going off to heal the lepers. He went to serve. That is what you see from Jesus again and again and again. And you were so right in your assessment of service as love. Service as love. And that is what Christ taught us. Instead, we've got this weird, and it's very Andrew Tate. Hope the algorithm doesn't go mad now. So I picked up a post from Mother's Day by a Christian pastor, and I'll read it to you. It says, "Dear women, !" So this is meant to be a Mother's Day post where we celebrate, all things mothers. "Dear women, ! Happy Mother's Day. Love your husband. Demand number 1. Marry who you can love and respect. Demand number 2. And respect who you are married to. Demand number 3. And I'm like, at some point there's got to be some love for the mothers here, right? Number 4, do not try to change your husband or destroy the king in him. And I'm just like, this is what the pastor's preaching. This is what the pastor's preaching. So, in about 5 lines, you've just burdened her with a bunch of demands that are all about looking after yourself, looking after you. I said, what are you giving? What love are you showing her? Stop trying to destroy the king in you. I was like, dude, you know what Jesus did with his crown? Guess what? Didn't have one, mate. Jesus didn't have a crown. He got rid of his crown in order to be the lamb that was slain, in order to be the servant king. So, this whole false notion that, all men are born kings. And I know, we have very similar things with women trying to uplift and empower each other. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things, but when we see that played out in spaces, I think it can be very, very damaging. And again, there's no responsibility or accountability for, you know, love her, care for her, treat her with, you know, treat her with care, treat her in a way that, you know, makes her want to respect you, because it's very difficult to respect somebody who is barking demands, expecting things of you, you know, burdening you, and then telling you you're not doing it well enough. Right.
Yeah. So
Let me oh no, it's good, it's good. Right, I just want to come on to our next question, which I will put in the chat for us as well.
Oh, Dionne, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Right, sorry, I think there was sorry, because I was going to jump in and then it went out.
Oh yeah, no, go for it, go for it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, because there was a few things, but to summarize, I think that the barriers also cause women to suffer in silence. So, and what that means, because of those attitudes that you both just discussed, it means that you know, the person is not safeguarded at all. It means that there are delays to their healing and recovery. Often the church, you know, they still think in terms of a separate compartmentalization. So we won't get the secular organizations involved because, you know, we're just going to pray this away. There's no need for that. You don't need to go to court. You don't need to go to that organization. Well, your pastor will sort everything out. And it's you know, I think sometimes they need to acknowledge you are not equipped. You do not have the expertise. You, in the same way that if somebody had an incurable illness, you are not equipped. Yeah, you can pray for them. You can do your deliverance ministry, but sometimes people need a doctor. Sometimes people need medication. So that's the thing. And the other thing you mentioned, yeah, this is it. Why are you getting involved? Are you you know, we have to acknowledge our limitations, and that's okay. We can't be all things to all men.
Yeah.
And it's also the concept of forgiveness, which of course is biblical, and that's what we need to do. But too many times we think it means reconciliation, and I get that, you know, well-intentioned Christians, for example, or whether it's leaders, they want to get you back together. They want to be peacemakers, but they don't. This denial, Yvette mentioned it before, but I think there's a denial. You cannot heal in the place where you were hurt. It's very difficult. So if someone continues to deny what someone's gone through, how's that going to work? We're seeing a few. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's some high profile church scandals. And I tell you what, ladies, I'm tired of hearing, oh, but he's such a good man. Why was she wearing that dress? Why, do you know what I mean? This nonsense that still continues. And as long as you keep saying that, what it effectively does is it means that women will continue to suffer in silence. You know, I think we have to have a bit of discernment. We have to have wisdom. And what happened to you, Dionne? I mean, him, you know, trying to getting you in the room with your abusive husband. Instead of them talking to him one-on-one or talking to you separately, and you know, it's really damaging. It's really damaging.
I will tell you what happened. So this is a story everybody should hear. So I, you know, went and spoke to it wasn't the church I attended, but a different church. Went and spoke to the pastor there to say that, you know, this person had sexually abused me for, you know, over a number of years, and that they were a risk to, you know, to young women, that particularly target vulnerable women. And the response, honestly, the response was just trying to, you know, oh well, let's get you in the room and, you know, talk this through, blah blah blah. And that's not a thing, right? So obviously I didn't do that. So fast forward about a year, and I can't remember the exact circumstance around it, but I did eventually go to the police. And of course, it takes longer to get to the police because, you know, by the time you've told 2 or 3 people and had backlash, and people told you that, oh, you must be mistaken, or you did something wrong to deserve it, or let's try and fix this in-house. Of course, you lose all of your confidence to be able to speak to those external authorities about it. So like I said, it took me over a year. Went to the police, gave my statement, blah, blah, blah. And one of the first things they say to you is, did you tell anybody else? So my response was, yes. I told, pastor such and such at this church. So tell me why, 2-3 months into the investigation, the police can't get hold of pastor such and such because pastor such and such is hiding from the police now. So thankfully I'd got, a lot of evidence on, because I'd sent emails to and fro as well and so I managed to give that to the police. When they eventually caught up with the pastor, they I've got to take my hats off. I don't have a very good opinion of the police in general. I've, very rarely had a good experience. However, on this occasion, they did pull a blinder. So because I've got that email kind of evidence that I had made a disclosure, the police contacted their local council, and they have something called, is it Lado or Ladder? Lado? Whoever knows about it, can you explain that for me in a minute? And which they had, which is, I think it's some sort of like local authority procedure, not safeguarding procedure, which is around disclosures and reporting. And basically the church got fined because it was proven that, a disclosure of abuse was made. Again, I've got the email correspondence, and even though the pastor tried to dodge, speaking to the police and didn't want to get involved once the police was there, but was more than happy to have me sit in a room with my abuser. And so the church were actually fined for failure to, follow the local authority procedures on disclosures. Somebody could explain Lado, because I remember hearing it at the time and I was like, what is that? So I don't know which one of you do want to share that. Maz, it sounds like something you'd know.
No, I don't know. Is it an abbreviation? I do
it is an abbreviation
every day. I could tell you about the procedure.
Yeah.
No, it must be unique.
I can find it.
Yeah. There might be different acronyms for different things.
I think it was specific for that region as well. So
it is. Lado is the local authority designated officer. So that would be for safeguarding. So in the UK, in the different areas of the UK, they've got a Lado officer, but also the Lado team. It's mainly around safeguarding for children and for vulnerable adults as well. So
we just call it safeguarding because I work with adults. It's just a safeguarding officer, and you have a who does the inquiries. Yeah. So a concern is raised, we do. But Lado is not something I'm familiar. It's just safeguarding manager.
It's the same thing. So the responsibility of managing allegations, providing advice and guidance, coordinating investigations, monitoring cases, and ensuring fairness. So, and this is something that's available to every single church and faith community. So, when you do get a disclosure, the whole responsibility isn't on you to fix the whole thing. You get to, pass it to the specialist team whose, job it is to do this every day, for them to actually carry out their investigations. This whole, pastors and leaders cannot do everything, and I know some think that it can, and I've had arguments with leaders who are like, no, it's our responsibility to keep marriages together, keep families together. I was like, no, it's not.
Dangerous ones.
Well, it's just, I don't understand. You've got to be some sort of egomaniac to think you can solve all problems all by yourself all the time. I don't know any other humans that are capable of that. We have to have support, we have to have education, we have to be able to rely on others. Leadership isn't like it's not a one-man band, is it? Leading a church or as a faith community, you can't do it by yourself. It's not meant to be. Jesus had his posse of 12.
That's the very ironic thing, deal. So safeguarding is everyone's business. So, you know, they're very selective, some of these, the people that you're describing, because they'll, like that pastor who tried to evade the police, where he had all the mouth to tell you what to do then. And it extends across all areas of life, because you'll have some of them that will want to tell you about medical procedures you have. You have a hysterectomy, you do this, you do that. And I see it in the mental health field all the time. You're telling people to stop taking their medication. When they become suicidal and what have you, you're nowhere to be found. You've absolved yourself of all responsibility. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm thinking there's gremlins in the system, don't want me to talk. Yeah, I'm just saying, so if you can't perform surgery, you can't perform surgery, be quiet, leave it to those who can. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say we're laughing about it, but it's so not funny, because it is maddening. You know, I wouldn't dare to walk up to somebody and suddenly be like, "Oh, you know what? Let me fix your car." Because guess what? I don't know how to fix cars. You know, and even if I did, in the context of leading ministries and churches and faith communities, it's still completely inappropriate. You know, still completely inappropriate.
It's ethical and it's legal responsibilities as well, isn't it? There's certain things that we can and can't do. We can't go and perform surgery on somebody because we're not skilled, we're not qualified to do that. And us attempting to do that can put somebody at risk.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think that for some leaders of Christian communities, for some, it's, you know, people want to see marriages healed, and it's a beautiful thing. Marriage is a beautiful thing, and it is beautiful for marriages to be healed. And I think for many, there's so much passion and so much compassion around that as well. For some, it is about control, and for some, it's about not wanting to reflect on the things that actually that they're seeing and they shouldn't be doing either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's about relinquishing that control, but it's so important that we have a multi-agency approach.
Yes.
And the thing is, the Bible isn't separate from the law. We're called to live by the law of the land. And you know, if we're willing to really study the Bible, we'll see that the law actually aligns with Scripture anyway. And so when it comes down to people reaching out for support, I was looking at a couple of scriptures which are in the safeguarding course and things like that. As much as we're called to forgive, we tend to focus on that so much. But that's not the only scripture in the Bible when it comes to disputes, when it comes to harm. And so we've also got Psalm 82, verse 3, where it talks about how we're called to give justice to the weak and the fatherless. We're called to maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. And then in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, we're also called to learn to do good and to seek justice, to correct oppression, and bring justice to the fatherless and please the widow's cause. So it's not always about all of the onus being on the victim. And I think a real serious issue that we need to look at when we're covering this kind of this part of the issue as well, is that as much as people have many different reasons for wanting to stay away from reporting or stay away from holding a perpetrator accountable, while we are telling the victim that the victim needs to forgive, telling the victim that they need to fix up themselves, telling the victim they should not be wearing clothes like that, telling the victim that they need to hold themselves in a certain manner, telling the victim that they need to be still and be quiet, telling the victim that they need to trust God to sort it all out. When we're doing that, we're not preventing future trauma or future harm to other people. And so sometimes you'll hear the phrase generational curse, when in fact, oftentimes it's not generational curse, it's generational trauma that hasn't been stopped when it was supposed to have been stopped.
Yeah. I can do nothing but agree with what you've just said there. I think you've just described something that's really, really key there. And we already talked about the kind of unfair and unjust burdens that are put upon women in these situations. By putting all of our attention and burdens and expectations on women when they're in these sort of crisis situations, perpetrator, what happens to the perpetrator? Nobody says anything to them. Nobody, holds them accountable. Nobody sits them down and says, like, what's been going on. And it, for all intents and purposes, what we've done is said, your behaviour's okay, hers isn't. That's what we're saying when we behave in that way. One of my favourite sayings of Jesus, and he said it frequently, and whether he was in it. Sorry, my dog being wild. 1 second.
It's okay.
Apologies. So whether he was healing, whether he just healed somebody, or whether he was, reprimanding somebody or calling them to account. Dog, stop.
Can't hear.
Go and sin no more. And that thing around sin no more is, sadly lacking in our Christian spaces, particularly when we have this dichotomy of whenever there's something wrong, particularly relationally, all of these expectations are put on the woman. Well, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should wear that, you shouldn't wear this. Nobody talks to the man. Nobody holds them accountable for behaviors, for attitudes. Nobody says, like, we've had this conversation now, go and sin no more. You know what things you should be doing, go do it. And that really, really doesn't happen.
And sometimes they need help to, I suppose, not sin anymore. And sometimes that help means reporting the incident, especially
Definitely.
when it means acknowledging that victim or survivor is in need of justice, but also preventing further harm. And, if we look at grace, because Jesus is very graceful, and I think, to be honest, when we're saying that, there's a lot of onus on the victim and the perpetrator isn't spoken to, quite often the perpetrator is spoken to because they're told, do you know what, you've fallen, but it's about making sure that you are given grace. And that is something that often happens. And I think what really concerns me as well is that from a lot of the cases that I've listened to, a lot of the cases that I've dealt with, when there have been people who have been perpetrators of abuse, and it's come to light, they've been moved to other positions, other senior positions, or more senior positions as well, given more access to be able to groom more vulnerable children. And I think it is horrible. It is horrible to think that this kind of thing can happen in churches across the board. It's not a race thing, unfortunately.
No,
There are some amazing, beautiful churches out there that really demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ as we're called to. But there are some churches, unfortunately, where bad people go into and they use the space to deliberately do bad things. And in order for us, I mean, anytime Jesus was dealing with anything dodgy, he would call it out. He'd identify it, he'd call it out, and he would deal with it. When we go to the doctors, when they're trying to find out if we've got an issue, they first have to do some tests to find out what it is. They call it out, they identify it so that they can deal with it. Do you know what I mean? And as difficult as it is, it's important to do that so that we can prevent other people from experiencing harm from that perpetrator. But it's not just about them experiencing harm from that perpetrator. When we've got people who experience different kind of traumas, who aren't given the space to move into areas or times of healing,
Mhm.
times of restoration, times of regeneration, times of justice, that then impacts whoever that victim or
Mhm.
survivor is surrounded by, their
Yeah.
future relationships, their children,
Mhm.
the rest of the family around them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's important for us to deal with these things.
Yeah. I mean, I will say actually, so that again it leads nicely to our on our kind of last question for this session, which is all around what good practices have we seen being actioned in churches and faith spaces,
Yeah.
and yeah, what good practices have we seen in action that we love and more we wish more people did, and then things that we hope will good practices that we would like to see moving forwards.
Yeah. In my current church, solid DBS checks for everybody and anybody who is in any position.
Mm-hmm.
Though obviously majority of them, if not all, are voluntary positions.
Yeah,
So if you are an usher, if you're working and supporting the soup kitchen,
yeah.
anything, if you
Mm-hmm.
are on the prayer team, if you're a pastor, whatever position anybody holds,
Yeah.
they have safeguarding training
Mm-hmm.
and they have to have DBS checks.
Yeah.
Before they...
I would agree with that. So one of my bugbears. So you can have different teams operating within church and faith environments, and you might have one team who's really great at
Mhm.
their safeguarding training, making sure they're kept up to date, making sure whether it's volunteers or staff are all working in a coherent way and everybody understands what the responsibilities are. And you can have another team that just don't. And I think that places of worship can suffer when they don't have a robust oversight of
Mm.
not just having policies, because honestly, I'm tired of people sending policies that nobody reads. And I know they don't read them because when I quote it back to them, they don't know what I'm talking about. I read all the small print, guys. Like I read the contract and the small bits, and the amount of people who. So when I then say we shouldn't even be doing this because it's not, the policy says not to. People get upset with me. Then like I'm calling. I was just like, well, I thought we were all working from the same, the same hymn sheet, but apparently we're not because we send policies out and we trust that people not only read them but understand how to implement them. And the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is that they don't. So it's got to come alongside actual training. So I would love to see that much, much more, and have the teams who are really good at it be able to perhaps support and train some of the teams that are not so good at it. So I think that would be something great that I would love to see more of.
I think what I would like to see more of is other organisations within the community working well with Christian communities, um, having that link, having those strong community links. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Because obviously you've got your multi-agency service hubs where you've got your police, you've got your hospitals, you've got your social workers, you've got all
Mm-hmm.
of those people who are meeting together, which is just fantastic. But I think there should be space for, I know that everybody's burdened down, but those professional public service organisations need to be making strong links with community leaders. And the reason why I say that as well is because I know of a few cases where somebody has suffered from quite horrific domestic abuse, police involved, until the perpetrator's been arrested or removed from the property. But then while the police have done all of that, that perpetrator is a leader of a Christian, are leaders of Christian organisations, and those organisations haven't been informed. But those leaders are there in positions of trust and they're working in positions of trust. they're ministering and they're working in positions of trust. And if those people were in the workplace or anywhere else, though their workplaces would need to be informed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, some of those perpetrators, they come back into the faith-based setting and literally choose another victim and groom another victim if they haven't already groomed most, if not the whole congregation. And unfortunately, I would like to think that it's quite rare, but unfortunately it's not.
It's not. Statistics tell us that it's not. I will say, so one church that I attended, they used this and I absolutely loved it, and I wish more places used it. So of course, as churches grow, you end up with, these small groups and cell groups and different teams needing to communicate with each other for lots of different reasons. I'm really uncomfortable with being in WhatsApp groups with a whole bunch of people I don't know. Because again, it just makes you very vulnerable. You're receiving messages, somebody's befriending you, and and I've had this at a church where some guy is trying to engage with you, and the minute you say no, you get 50 phone calls and getting berated on the phone from this random, just no, it's just absolutely no. So there's a really great community app called Band App. You can set it up for your church or faith organization. Gives you loads and loads of controls. So things like you can set up a group that's just for outbound messages broadcasting to the members. You can have those small groups, for like home groups or worship team or kitchen volunteers, whatever. And you can allow them to talk to each other in a group, but you can turn off the settings so that nobody is allowed to have a one-to-one conversation on chat. It also doesn't share anybody's phone numbers. So you'll have the name and profile picture, but it doesn't share any phone numbers or any other private information. It's got like a parent-child version on it as well, so that a teenager who's in a group, their account is managed by their parents, and they can determine what information. And it's so great. I'm tired of being put in WhatsApp groups by church leaders who haven't asked my permission if they can share my number to a whole bunch of people. And I've been given no rules. I was like, are we allowed to just call everybody now? And should I just save everybody's number? Having that happen with young people, where, I've been put in a group with people who are underage and told to go and arrange something. And I'm like, you need to remove my number from this child, So yes, I would definitely like to see more use of of safe technologies and apps that are specifically designed with community engagement, but with safeguarding in mind, where we're not, where we've got some controls over who's talking to who, how that's happening, and there's proper oversight of it.
Yeah.
Did you have something, Maz, to add?
Yeah. Okay, so as you both mentioned, I think so. Back to the original question in terms of the good practice that we've seen is around DBS. Although DBSs are any serial killer can get one, but they're useful. They're useful. It's a good start. I find there's more awareness. So there's the call Angela or whatever in the toilets, isn't there? Call this. We never used to have that 20 years ago. I know that. Yeah. So, and I think we need to continue. It's the beginning. So more awareness about the various types of abuse, and goes back to what I said before, safeguarding is everyone's business. You don't have to decide what is a crime, what is not. You have a duty of care to report, especially if someone's life is in danger or that person is posing a threat to someone else. I know you mentioned about policies, but half the time people, like you said, they don't know what the policies are. So we need to know, okay, is there, for example, what's your complaints process? How is it monitored? What are the consequences for people in this situation? If somebody's been accused or if they've been convicted, what then? How do you ensure you protect vulnerable groups? What are the penalties? Those kind of things. Because we know we've been saying it's important. It's actually a matter of life and death sometimes. We know lots of high-profile cases. We focus on children, rightly so, but there are lots of cases of vulnerable adults. So there are cultural factors. There's all sorts of religious factors that come into play. And for too long, people have said, oh, that's what that religious community does, so we'll leave them to it. They'll do their monitoring in-house. No, like Yvette said, there needs to be some collaborative practices. High-profile cases like Victoria Climbié, for example, highlight the very thing we're talking about, whereby a child who is no longer here because of what they call it a church, it was a cult effectively that's still actually operating, that convinced the caregivers that this poor child was a witch and needed to be exorcised, and that kind of thing. So people are literally dying out here when we leave people to their own devices. So we need a collaborative approach. We don't need to say, oh, well, that's what they do in their community, therefore let them get on with it. Lives are at stake. Can't afford to turn a blind eye and say, oh, he's just a nice man, you've got it wrong. We really need, and I think we'll get there. We will get there, but it's still not quite there. So yeah, that's where we are.
I think just on that same trajectory that came out terribly, my teeth back in. This kind of, we're talking about, like robust procedures for, disseminating information, educating people, and reporting. So a barrier that I've come up with, and this was recently, was raising a safeguarding issue with a leader who was then like, well, we don't think it's an issue. To then go to the church's safeguarding person and, repeat my concern, only to be told it's not an issue. For then a year later, the parent of the child who I was concerned about raising the issue, oh, now it's an issue. And having reporting stopped because somebody doesn't think that your report is valid is something we've got to, that has to not be a thing. If you learn anything in your kind of safeguarding training and about disclosures, when you're receiving that disclosure, your job is not to judge whether it's valid or not. That is never the answer. Record it, yes, and then we pass it up the chain, and whether it's passed to a LADO or police or whoever, and if it turns out to be nothing, then we're all very, very relieved. But we've also got a paper trail of who got told what, when it got told to them, and what the next steps were taken in order, and were there any additional steps needed to make sure that this scenario doesn't occur again. Not, I don't think it's an issue, so we're not even going to write it down, which is what happened more than once, so that is definitely a practice I would love to see is more, I don't know if independent is the right word, but processes that don't allow individuals to decide not to do it, because that it just it doesn't help, because 20 years down the line, and someone said, oh, this leader has been doing X, Y, and Z, and there's a load of victims. And everyone's like, well, why didn't somebody say anything? And people were like, well, we did say something, but the people up the rung on the ladder didn't want to hear us. That's we don't want a repeat of those circumstances. So I would very much like to see reporting systems in place that can't be stopped by one person not believing.
And they shouldn't be. But again, that also depends on the culture of and the mindset of the group and the teachings that they're constantly receiving or regurgitating within whichever faith-based community it is. And I think that's why it's important for there to be collaboration between faith-based communities and public service agencies as well, because you've just got more of a chance then, I think, of people being held to account.
Well, I also find as well, so I know certainly for, a lot of public sector services and departments, they want to be able to engage with us because, of course, things that we're talking about, some of the kind of specific intersections around culture, faith, and religion are things that they don't necessarily have access to other than by formal training, of which, there's very little formal training around safeguarding and faith-based settings. So by, developing those relationships, it's good for them. It's good for them in their daily practices and in their profession. And that inevitably helps, people like you and I, who, when we needed help, could have got much better help had there been people with just a little bit more education and a little bit more understanding.
Yeah.
So I think you really are right in, leaders taking some of those steps to really engage with local services and, turn up to those community forums, turn up to the local community events where other people from your community are going to be,
Yeah.
and start building those relationships.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
While we're waiting for Maz,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
I'm here. I am
great,
here.
yeah.
It's just that I've turned the camera off because of the bandwidth. It keeps.
Got you.
Yeah.
Got you.
Cool. Okay. I was just wanting to, while we're looking at that last question as well, and we're talking about what good practice have we seen.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is absolutely fantastic
Yeah.
is seeing people who are really educated around healthy relationships
Oh,
and
yeah.
making it clear for everybody to understand what is a healthy relationship and what is an unhealthy relationship from a biblical
Absolutely.
perspective, but what is actually healthy. Because if we understand what is actually healthy, then we understand that those are the spaces that we need to be hitting. Those are the things that we need to be looking towards. Do you know what I mean? So it's great for people, to be people who are in married relationships, people who are moving into those relationships, for young people, for other people who are who are not actually married yet, but to have that understanding of what a healthy marriage is.
Absolutely.
Without basing it all around one sex or one person, just what love is and how the love of Christ is and can be demonstrated in marriage. Seeing a lot of that now with really good, accurate information is really quite beautiful.
I will say so. In the church that I attend at the moment, they've been so active and purposeful about teaching gender equality from the pulpit. And it's brought me absolute joy and delight to, have, women delivering the message, men delivering the message, men, championing women leaders, men encouraging each other to go and, go lead at the crash, like, this is our next generation. This is how our young boys become men, is when the men invest in the children. And so that's brought me so much joy, dispelling myths about, women's positions in church and in the community. I remember a really wonderful sermon that was basically dispelling this notion that women shouldn't, preach and teach and lead. And it was like, actually, he said, when Jesus rose from the dead, he chose to reveal himself to women because he trusted them with the resurrection message.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
100%, 100%.
It was, and to have a middle-aged guy delivering that was just like, oh yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
well, that's why I love hearing you guys speak as well. I mean, Maz can speak now. She just, it's difficult to go without a camera, but she's ready to share.
Sorry, Yvette, just repeat the gremlins, they keep harassing me. I heard you say something about the healthy relationship. So can you just please repeat the last part of the question that you were referring to?
It was what good practice have you seen? So
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about the fact that I've seen some greatly educated people who are now sharing information about healthy relationships, not just from a one sex standpoint, so not just about what men should be doing or what women should be doing, giving people a clearer picture from a biblical standpoint of what a healthy relationship
Mm-hmm.
is, what it should look like, what it should involve, and how it really does demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I think we touched on it before. So we certainly talked about all of the practical things around policies and
Mm-hmm.
DBSs that we do. But more than that, on a human level, how about we show a bit of empathy? How about that?
Yeah.
You know, the cop out that people say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what when someone discloses something to you, I don't know what to respond." Well, you're a human being, aren't you? How would you want to be treated? You don't have to have all the words and the expertise, but if you don't know what to do, then you need to make it your business to know where to signpost the person. And I do see examples of that even in my local church. I see it in other churches. There's certainly more awareness, but I think we on an individual, on a collective basis, we need to acknowledge our own biases and our perceptions of the opposite sex. You know, it might be, you know, you might have a porn addiction. How does that shape how you interact with the opposite sex?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that might be your thing, but you're denying that happens. So there are things that, you know, steps that you might need to take. But I think we are evolving.
Yeah.
Like I said, this conversation probably may have had to happen in secret 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
so the fact that we're
Yeah. Oh, have we lost you again, Mouse? Just give it a sec.
reason, but I'll yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got
Right,
you
we've
back.
just got you back now. We've got you back.
I do apologize. This is the craziest thing tonight. It keeps logging me out. Someone doesn't want me to speak, but I'll just it's crazy. I'll round it up and I'll
Yeah.
say that there has been a lot of progress made. We can see that the fact that we have forums like this, the
Yeah.
fact that even Yvette, listen, and Dionne, the work that you do in churches, and spreading that awareness, training people, you know, so it makes us all accountable. So that's some good practice that needs to continue. And through our Bibles, I host some Bible studies, and I touch on this. But what I do, there's still the level of discomfort. So anything
Yeah.
that's taboo, you know, people are like, oh, do we need to, you know, there's this toxic positivity that still exists. We need to get rid of that. So just because someone is in pain and it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's your issue. The person has come and they're bleeding, they're hurting. Now what are you going to do? How and you know, there's lots of biblical examples, isn't there, that we can use of people from Tamar to the concubine woman, the Samaritan woman, the various women that you know, Hagar, you know, all sorts of people who were honored, who God used. So let's not dismiss that, and let's continue to be living examples ourselves. And I'll leave it there before I get thrown out of this room. So thank you, ladies.
Oh, great. So I think I mean, guys, thank you so much. I just acknowledge the confidence and the bravery at just keeping it real. Sometimes, you know, it's hard. You know, we've all gone through stuff in our own, you know, churches and faith communities that has probably damaged us, but we've also healed from that. And, you know, we've managed to, with the help of God and God's grace, we've healed in a way that now we're able to share some of the things that we've learned along our journey and help to, you know, highlight some of the bumps in the road so that it's a little smoother for people coming after us. So on that note, I do want to obviously plug our church safeguarding courses. So they're available on my website. You can book them as an individual. You can book it for groups. It is online. It's self-paced. They are kind of delivered in partnership with the wonderful Lioness Relaunch, which is Yvette's company, and you've put years of work into the online safeguarding training for faith settings. So it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself a leader or not. If you are a member of a faith community, it's for you. So you can find that on dionsimpson.co.uk, or get us in the chat. Go and find Lioness research across any social media. What's your web address, Yvette?
Yeah, lionessrelaunch.com.
Lionessrelaunch.com. So I'll put the links in the chat. If you are a faith community, whether it's Christian or another faith, we'd love you to contribute to this conversation. I think it'd be really great to have some other faith perspectives. I think would be really, really wonderful to have. Men out there, we also want to talk to you. I'm a huge fan of men leading other men. We don't want to come across as all male leaders are bad. We know that that's not the case. We understand that history and culture play an important part about how it play an important role in how leadership is carried out. But there is definitely a space for men leading men, and teaching and encouraging boys and young men in their relationships, how they treat people. We all still a little scarred from watching that adolescent show. We want our young men to be different. We want our young men to be better. So I really encourage you guys, come and speak to us. If you're interested in other training options, again, do get in touch. Maz, do you have some wellbeing services available also?
Yeah, oops, yes, certainly. Thank you, ladies. On a first come, first serve basis, I do offer one-to-one virtual coaching sessions, because I'm aware people are from all over the country, and I know you're going to put the details in the link, but feel free to contact me, or on Instagram at Maz Transformational Coaching. If you would like, it's for any woman who is feeling depleted, who would like to get the self-care that they need, have better boundaries, and just really be your authentic self. So that's happy to help with that, or just connect with me, and we can, if you object to the discussion, connect with me. I want to know, what do you think? Thank you.
We do want to hear all those things, because it's a conversation at the end of the day, isn't it? It's a conversation. So it's after 9, guys. I think we've had a really, really great session today. So thank you, Maz. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you to all those who have joined in today.
Thanks,
and for all those of you who will be watching it at a later time, have a blessed evening. And we'll be back soon with more divisive conversations. No, I'm joking. With informative conversations, talking about the hard stuff, but in a good way. Okay, bye.